Welcome everyone to another episode of Taking Up Space, a Michelle A. Mayer podcast. Always excited about coming forward, you guys. Today's no different. Today I want to come on and offer you a perspective on something that I elaborated last week on. You know, this whole Babylonian perspective is intriguing, isn't it? I love talking about Babylon, y'all. And, you know, I wrestled with bringing it forward for a while because I just didn't know where I wanted to begin with it. And now that I'm on this roll with it, I just, you know, it morphs into so many different conversations, Babylon. Babylon is the fullness of spirituality. Honestly, it is. Because Babylon wasn't created initially wicked. Nimrod was not wicked initially. I know we want to paint, you know, my thing is, one thing you will get from this channel is originality. I'm not looking to talk about what somebody else said. You know what I mean? Like, I want to talk about things that fascinate me and what I've come up with in trying to make sense of the things that fascinate me. You know what I mean? Like, how I can unpack it and make it make sense in my life today so that I can really ingest it and get the most from it. Because I really want to know, right? I just don't want to be talking about it and I don't really know and it's a hot topic and I'm just going to jump in because people are talking about it. No, I'm going to talk about it because I really want to know. Babylon, what Nimrod did in Babylon was really a big deal, obviously. But, you know, from a spiritual perspective, he went the full gamut. He started off righteous. I mean, he was a dictator. This is the old world system. It was a world of dictators after the flood. It wasn't a democratic society. I guess you could say it was democratic. It had some democratic components to it. But when we listen and we peel back the truths of what the Apocrypha and the Bible speak to Nimrod, as I did in my conversations on Babylon, you find that the people wanted Nimrod to lead them. Nimrod never came to the people and said, I want to be your king. Come give me all of your precious jewels. Go and mine this mountain for me and extract all the vital resources. He didn't do that. The people came to Nimrod and forfeited their sovereignty and made him their Lord and King. That is what the Apocrypha says. And then he comes up with this idea of building this tower. Now, that's when it got very sticky and his intentions were corrupt at that point. But prior to that, he wasn't always corrupt. I mean, surely the whole world were idol worshipers. But that was not a sin at that time. God wasn't condemning everyone for worshiping idols at that time. That was just the way of the world. That was how everyone was doing it. And it wasn't because of Nimrod. Surely he had his hand in it. But really, it was many of the factions that were in power, the fallen ones, were behind it. And of course, Nimrod is a mighty hunter in the world. And he's going toe-to-toe with these fallen angels on behalf of the house of Israel. It's a sticky conversation because, you know, we do know that God says that there is no idol worship and the world is doing so. But I think what the Apocrypha and the Bible is conveying is that this will be an incremental rollout that God would establish in fighting this. He would not punish Nimrod. He will work hand in hand with Nimrod and give Nimrod power and authority. Nimrod has the skins of Adam and Eve, which give him a superpower, a superhuman capability. He's a giant. He's a mighty hunter. Esau the same way. Esau was a mighty hunter like Nimrod. These are very powerful people in the world. They don't look like me and you. They just don't. But they are God's children. So nonetheless, it makes us rethink a lot of things that are being spoken to in the Old Testament as far as these giants are concerned. And were they the only very big entities in the world? Were children of God giants? Because the Apocrypha speaks to Nimrod being having the graces of God and standing in righteousness with God for a season. But it does not say when that season was up and where the break happened within Nimrod from being turned from God and honoring the fallen ones. But today's conversation, I want to speak to that. You know, Nimrod and the Babylonian kingdom is a very interesting conversation that we will have several times on this podcast because it's so vast and it goes so wide and on many different perspectives. But today I want to speak to Satan, the fallen ones, and how many of these perspectives that were birthed in Babylon as far as sigils are concerned, and this whole golem component is concerned, and how that plays a pivotal role in our lives today. It's my thought that the golem, these man-made entities that don't have a soul, were all created during the time of Babylon. During the let's just say, not the time of Babylon, let's just say during the time of Nimrod. All this stuff was perfected during the time of Nimrod. Why? Well, because after the flood, God disembodied these fallen angels. They no longer had the ability to go about life the way that they were doing before the flood. They didn't have a body. They couldn't just get up and go and do something and interact with one another in that capacity. They are in the invisible realm at this point. They're bound to the world of invisibility. The people cannot see them. They have no way of interacting with them. They're limited. And this whole invisible realm is a very vast realm. I will do a podcast dedicated to that at a later time. But this invisible realm, God has bound many to this invisible realm. They're still conscious beings. They just have no way of interacting with human life. They have no way of interacting with nature. They are bound in this void type place. It's as if it's a layer of reality that's superimposed upon this reality and acts in real time as this reality acts, but we don't see them. You can have a whole cow sitting right in front of you that's bound to the invisible realm, and you walk right through it like it's not there, because it's not. It's not effective in your reality. It does not hold any space in your reality. It cannot make any movement or cause any change in your reality. This is where these fallen ones are after the flood. So their main goal is to find a partner. Now they are at the mercy of human. They are at the mercy. God gives Adam and Eve's descendants, Noah's descendants, the upper hand, or it's such, so he feels. He levels the playing field. And he says, you will need to partner with Noah. You didn't want to partner. Now you're going to partner. I'm going to set it up so you have no choice. And sure, you are insightful, you're intelligent. But I'm going to give Noah and Noah's descendants the leverage here, because they're not as insightful and they're not as intelligent as you. So I'm going to give them, a couple of miles advantage on you in the physical, so they can get themselves up to point and that they can begin firing off on all cylinders without your interruption. But this does not work. It doesn't. What we find happening is, this is why Babylon is so huge. Nimrod, the mighty hunter, would be turned by these entities somewhere along the way. And it will be a trickle-down effect to the people. This is where this knowledge corrupted him. The skins that Adam and Eve had were never to be coveted. And this is why. They were coveted, and now Nimrod is the only one that has the power. Yet, if he would have multiplied himself amongst others that were just as integral as he was, and just as powerful, they could have kept him in alignment. They could have buffeted the turning of him. Them having the knowledge right along with Nimrod would have made the task that much more easier for Nimrod. It would have given these fallen ones more head count to learn and to try to find and scheme a way to overcome than just this one man. You have this one man with these skins and with this power against the vast sea of these individuals. And these are wise individuals. And you got a whole, the Apocrypha, the Bible says, well, the Apocrypha says there was 200 that came to Mount Hermon. That was at the time of Mount Hermon. Now they've multiplied. They have children. And one man, Nimrod, is against all of these individuals. And they're hyper intelligent, angelic beings. And all he has are the skins of Adam and Eve. And you mean to tell me they suffice? That the skins of Adam and Eve worked? That was enough? Yet, what happens is the skins of Adam and Eve were enough to keep them at bay and to dominate them. But the skins of Adam and Eve were not enough to repel them from turning him intellectually. He had no counterpart. He had no partner. It was just a matter of time. And so I don't want to fall off with that. I don't want to leave you with that, but I wanted to add that because that's super important. Once they turn Nimrod, he begins bargaining with them. And, I'm sure part of the bargaining was basing everything off of what the people were fearing and what he feared, which was another flood. The fear would open them up to the sin. And they would say, yeah, we are all in this thing together. We better try to build something up high to counter this thing in case we ever do it again. Instead of saying, you know what, we're not going to allow this to happen again. We're going to stand in the righteousness of our creation. But because these entities were so pervasive, their hearts probably did say, you know what, we are going to counter this thing. We're going to stand in the truth of God and there will be no more wrath of God. But these entities are amongst them that have been in the heavenly realms and says, you don't know God like we know God. There's nothing you can do to prevent God from doing this. God is temperamental, friend. God, you don't know what this God is going to do. Take it from us. Why do you think we came here? Why do you think we would sacrifice heaven for this if it wasn't all of that kind of stuff? And now he's gotten them in their ear, or they're in his ear, and he second guesses and he fears. And fear coupled with ingenuity and intelligence is something else. He thinks he can find a way to safeguard himself. Now he's going to be God. And, all these different things began to happen. They began to build the tower. But like I said in the podcast, the tower wasn't the only thing that they did. They did many things other than build the tower. They were spiritually elite individuals. They were creating aspects of spirituality based upon the fundamentals that God had granted. And they were maximizing on this thing. They had spirituality down to a science in Babylon. This is the heightened level of creation. Seriously. They had levels of spirituality broken down to a science, in which it's a science. They had made it so simplistic. That's how you know something. That's how you know a person knows something. Is when you can talk something extremely complicated into something very simple. They made it simple as 1, 2, 3. They had done things with gravity so that you could lift very heavy objects with sound. They were pushing the limits when it came to spirituality. So, when we began to unwrap this, unpack it, surely Babylon had gotten corrupt. It went from an apex to a righteous state, from a righteous state to a very convoluted state over a long period of time. And they had began reverse engineering the way that God created this reality. This is how they would use the Tower of Babel. They built up and they were using the science of the word, of sound, to create change in the world. They were reverse engineering the way that God created this reality. They were super interested in how God did this thing. And it is that aspect that they had down to a science. And when we look at Satan and these fallen angels, these are the fallen angels that would lead and direct Nimrod in doing this. That's why I say people say, well, Nimrod is Baal and Nimrod is this and Nimrod. I don't see how Nimrod is Baal. Nimrod is serving an aspect of these fallen angels, which is Baal. Even if Baal is not a fallen angel, then Baal is bound to a sigil. The fallen angels are bound to sigils. How do I know that? This is what distinguishes humans from them. The creation, the way that they were created. When God created man, God created him from the dust of the ground. Genesis chapter 2, verse 6. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's the biblical version of the creation of man. When we look at Enoch, the book of Enoch, chapter 30, verse 10. On the sixth day, I commanded my wisdom to create man from 7 consistencies. 1, his flesh from the earth. 2, his blood from the dew. 3, his eyes from the sun. 4, his bones from the stone. 5, his intelligence from the swiftness of the messengers and from cloud. 6, his veins and his hair from the grass of the earth. 7, his soul from my breath and from the wind. And I gave him 7 natures: to the flesh, hearing; the eyes for sight; to the soul, smell; the veins for touch, the blood for taste, bones for endurance, to the intelligence, sweetness, enjoyment. I conceived a cunning saying to say, I created man from invisible and from visible nature. Of both are his death and life, an image. He knows speech like some created thing, small in greatness, and again, great in smallness. When God created man, he created man from the earth, using his breath as the component that gave him life. But listen to what God did when he created the angels. And from the rock I cut off a great fire, and from the fire I created the orders of the incorporeal 10 troops of messengers. 10. He broke them down into 10 distinct factions. And their weapons are fiery, and their raiment a burning flame. And I commanded that each one should stand in his order. Listen. I commanded that each one should stand in his order. How did he do that? We just heard what God said about him creating Adam, or mankind, all from the earth, all components of the earth, and he uses his breath to give him life. But when we see these angels being created, they're all created from the earth, but then he takes it a step further and he binds them to a command. And I commanded that each one should stand in his order. And one from out of the order of messengers, having turned away with the order that was under him, conceived an impossible thought to place his throne higher than the clouds above the earth, that he might become equal in rank to my power. And I threw him out from the height with his messengers. And he was continuously flying in the air above the bottomless pit. What we find here that distinguishes Adam, Eve from these fallen angels. This is the first group of messengers. God says in the Apocrypha in the next chapter, after he completed his creation of Adam, or of man, he says, small in greatness, and again, great in smallness. And I placed him on earth, a second messenger, honorable, great, and glorious. And I appointed him as a ruler to rule on earth and to have my wisdom. And there was none like him of earth of all my existing creatures. Why? When God created this initial angel, he bound him to a command. But how would he do it? How would God bind him to a command? Limiting him, his scope, his capacity. He would bind this angel by sigils. These angels are distinct from one another because they all have different sigils that they are bound to. 10 distinct sigils. From the head all the way to those that are beneath the head. They are bound by sigils. The sigil that God will create to bind the head would be different than the sigil that would be created that the head would use to control those beneath it. 20 sigils. This is what distinguishes Adam from these fallen angels. Adam, Eve, and their descendants are not bound by sigils. Not by God. They are bound by a word. And this is how these entities will be so obsessed with trying to reverse engineer how God created this. They're trying to reconstruct or reverse engineer the sound mechanism that God used to create. Because this was a new thing. This was something that this is why God says there was none like him. I created him from the visible and the invisible, all through sound. So these fallen ones are bound by sigils. Nimrod is not bound by a sigil. If Nimrod was bound by a sigil, they would be controlling Nimrod. They could find the sigil, they could find the science, because that too is what they are bound to. And they could use that science to control Nimrod. But Nimrod is not bound to that particular science. This is why God disembodied them. We're looking at oil and water here. The same, but different. Yet what we find is that instead of, initially, I'm sure they were working hand in hand with Nimrod and saying, this is a joint effort. We need each other in this. You know, God has flooded the world. They're capitalizing on the catastrophe. Remember, Noah and his descendants know what happened before the flood, but they don't know like the fallen ones know. These fallen ones were revered prior to the flood. And now they're disembodied. And Noah and his descendants are having to go it alone. So there's certain levels of comforts that came from having these fallen ones that Noah and his descendants don't have any longer. And they're having to get their intelligences up and their wherewithal up so that they can create levels of comfort for their own selves that are not contingent upon what the fallen ones bring to the table. And it takes time to do these things. Seasons and many, many years, trial and error. And because they want the comfort. Why are we going through this? Why are we reinventing the wheel? Why don't we just deal with these people? Oh, they need us to make them a vessel? Okay, well, let's make them a vessel. We'll make them a vessel if they can increase the crops. We'll make them a vessel if they can help us make this boat and give us the wisdom of how to navigate and all these different things. But what I want you to focus on is that these fallen ones, Satan himself also, all of them bound to sigils. And this is how they are able to control. This is how Satan's kingdom is not divided. Satan can control his kingdom by way of sigils. What are sigils? So a sigil is and this is off the top of my head. So don't think, oh, well, she said this wrong or she said this right. You can Google what a sigil is, okay? But a sigil is something that you construct. A lot of times they're made out of declarations. You know, it could be a declaration of a thing that you want to come to pass, and you create a sigil by writing the words out and then finding all the common letters and subtracting the multiples of those common letters. So if you say, I love you. There's only one I in I love you. There's only one L. There's two O's. So you would subtract the multiple of O's and you would just hold on to that one O. Okay, O. There's only one V, only one E, and only one I. And you find a way of constructing a image based upon the letters, the single letters that make up the word I love you. And so there's various forms of doing this, but it involves invoking feeling and imagery, and you creating an idea in your mind and holding that idea while you're creating the image, and then you add more emotion to it. Nonetheless, a sigil is somewhat like a symbol that conveys a idea, a statement. And these sigils could be used for a number of things. A lot of times people will use them for protection. Many times in the ancient system, you had small communities of people that would create these sigils to protect their crops or to protect their families. And so you say, we are protected, and you wrote that out and you invoked a lot of energy into it, and you did all these things at certain times in the year, at certain times of the day, on certain days of the week, all this type of stuff you do, and it empowers this sigil, this symbol, and it gives it a life of its own. Yet what we find, and they will do this for various things. I mean, it can get very elaborate, the levels of insight and intelligences that they would invoke into these sigils. And what happens with these sigils is that once you create it, you can put it away, meaning you can disengage it. But a lot of times people did not do that. They would just create these sigils and give life to them, and then use them and then disregard them. They would not dismantle them or deactivate them. And these sigils would become dormant, and they will become scavenger type entities. Meaning they'll take any type of light, any type of energy that they can get so that they can survive. And because they're created by man and not God, they're created in a flawed nature from the beginning. So they are not bound to the constraints of their creation anymore. They're intelligent now. They're always looking for a way of surviving, like most things that are living would do. And because of the act in which they partake of in becoming a scavenger to find ways of surviving, they've morphed into a convoluted construct of what they were originally to be. And these sigils take on a life of their own, and they live in the disembodied world along with the fallen ones. There's many of them. And they create a lot of problems in the world. So much so that there are sigils that people are using that don't know that they're sigils. It's as if these sigils live way beyond the person that created them. They can live indefinitely. They don't have a life cycle unless you give it one. You are acting as God in creating this thing. And people were doing it. And many at this junction in life, it's as if there are some sigils. I don't want to say many, but I believe that there are many. There's got to be many, but there are some sigils that have become extremely powerful. They're not gods. They're sigils that have taken on another aspect of life that has morphed from its original creation and has been fed over time consistently with attention as if it is a being or if it was a being. And they are very powerful. Very powerful. And all of these things were done by way of these fallen ones. At the time they were doing it, it was done in the intention of empowering the people. But these fallen ones can obviously see far into the future. They say, we'll let them feel like they're being empowered. Okay, great. Let them feel as if they're in control. We're playing the long game. So now they got the sigils in place. And the sigils, they own the symbol too, so they are always in control of. Always. They own the initial construct of, because they probably created them. So they are in full control of this sigil. And because their kingdom is not broken up, because they're bound to sigils. Their kingdom is not broken up. They don't have there's no war in their kingdom. They got order in their kingdom. They can manage the flow of who manages these sigils, these symbols that many of the world's systems honor today. And they will go as far as, like I said, creating these golem, these soulless beings. This is what they were doing in Babylon. Sigils, golem, you name it. These soulless beings that were the worker class beings that were supposed to do all the grunt work and all the stuff that people didn't want to do. And the people found it fun. I don't want to say fun. The people found it acceptable. Why? Because it gave them a certain level of comfort. Never spawning any personal level of interest. Seemed harmless. And these golem are going around and they're obviously looking different from the people, from human. So people are like, okay, that's a golem. We don't pay that any attention. He or she does all of our grunt work. But then something happened. I don't know what it was. Could it have been a natural disaster? I don't know. But something happened where these golem have begun mating with the people. Were they off to a secluded area and they secluded them and allowed them to mate amongst people? The people began mating with the golem. They took them away from the general population and allowed them to go to a quarantined area and then allowed them to mate. And then later, in generations and generations and generations later, reintroduce these people to the populous area without knowing that these people have mated with golem. And these people are fascinated or mesmerized at the beauty of these golem descendants, those that have mated amongst the people. And it becomes popular to mate with these, working to the agenda. Now you've got another aspect, totally controllable by these fallen ones introduced into the population. You got the fallen ones at the top of the pyramid. They have their sigils in place that people honor in the form of spiritual systems. Many of these deities, not many of them, some of these deities are sigils. How do you know the difference? Unless you know the full story of these deities, you won't know what's a sigil and what's not. Once you begin pulling back the layers of the creation of this thing, is it a sigil or is it a deity? Because a deity is an ancestor. It's an ancestor. Someone that was living, that had lived at a particular time and has transitioned. Yet their acts were so monumental in the earth that they are renowned in the world even today. That's an ancestor, friend. Moses, Jacob, Abraham, Adam, Eve, ancestors. Wanted to come on and add this to the pot today. All of these things were created by people All of them. Much of this was created in Babylon. Much of this. And much of all of this was used I'll say, all of this is a direct mimicry of what God does. From the sigils to the golems to everything else. The golems being created were man trying to copy the creation of Adam. They just couldn't get a soul. There's no destiny attached to this person. But you have a body with no soul and no destiny. And they will be able to use this golem for all kinds of things because the golem could not accrue karma. This is why you see a lot going on in the world, whereas people are perplexed as to, you have human that is impressed by what seems to be golem. They're impressed, but they're bound to two separate systems. You are bound to karma. They're not. Two separate systems. It's going to cost you tremendously. Whereas the cost isn't the same for them. It will cost everybody, but the cost for you is worse. And you have no clue. You're playing a game that is more expensive for you to play than anybody. And you're taking all the risk. You're the runner. Yet, what happens is these all of these creations will be creations that they would use God's creations as the foundation of. Nothing that has been created is outside of what God has already created. Nothing. And in trying to recreate what God created only makes your life much more complicated. You end up being servants to that which you create. You can never stay in a position of mastering your creation like God can. You can never outsmart your creation. Interesting. Another podcast episode for you today. Hope all is well with you. You're loved more than you'll ever know. I'll never stop telling you. Be good to yourselves and be good to one another. Peace and love.